technology companies when it comes to influencing lawmaking. As we're seeing the Facebooks and the Googles, now that they are becoming these powerhouse technology companies, are also getting more and more involved in Washington, D.C. And they are getting all of their people and their money behind legislation that they say is better for people. Is that really the case? And what is the role of technology companies and how they work in D.C.?
Thank you for that one, because that's what I want to talk about. So I think it's not just about people sharing their voices, but it's also about issue experts sharing their voices. And whether it's a company that has the issue expertise, or a trade association, a labor union, whatever type of organization, a community group, an alumni association, you all have your own expertise that should be shared in DC amongst lawmakers, but then also with people as well, because when you look at so much lawmaking happening and then regulations on top of proposed legislation, there has to be a distinction between individual thought and then also the issue experts. I used to be a lobbyist for a bunch of years before I started Hotbox, and I'm so proud here, because he did talk about lobbyists. And but I was a lobbyist for some various nonprofit organizations, and my job was to kind of share individual voices with members of Congress and their staff so that they can make more informed decisions. When I quit my job to start my company, that's what I wanted to use technology to bring. Instead of hiring a lobbyist to do to amplify your voice in Washington, D.C., my goal was to create a company that could amplify your voice while you didn't have to physically go walk the halls of Congress. And I think that the role of technology in sharing people's views and companies' views and issue experts' views is to make sharing your voice more sophisticated rather than just banging the drum louder. And when you look at Tea Party groups, when you see angry people going to Washington, that's a sign of frustration instead of being more sophisticated about getting your voice heard. And I think you see companies, especially technology companies, now growing in that space and having offices in Washington and really making connections with lawmakers and regulators in a way that's never been done before.
I'll just add a couple of comments to that. I think the issue experts is important to me, because I think the people in the technology field, actually in this particular constituency, in Rose constituency here, if you look at it, I think there's so much of advanced knowledge that a lot of those colleagues in Washington, D.C. wouldn't be able to fathom. I don't mean to be disrespectful, but they're not keeping up with it as fast as one would like. And I think the most important thing is, how many of us actually know what kind of prediction algorithm is being used by Google when they're doing the next search for you, or for that matter, Amazon, which is putting up your next most thing which they absolutely know you're going to buy in 10 minutes from now. That information needs to be fed back to the guys in Washington, D.C. and say, this is what is possible today. Go and tell everybody else who doesn't know about this, or figure out ways to educate the rest of the people that this is possible, and it's not bad. It's all good for you. Instead of you spending 3 hours trying to find something which you would never have found, if Amazon is going to help you find it in 3 seconds, that's actually good for commerce, good for a lot of the economy. But people are going to be spooked by the whole thing. It's incumbent on the people from Amazon to go to Washington, D.C. and explain what the heck they're doing. It's not magic. Well, it is, but it's close.
Well, my sense is it's, I agree with what Dr. and the other panelists said. I don't think that it's about Silicon Valley or Facebook or Google having more of a voice. I think it's a question of what are the values that the Valley has, which is one of disruption, of risk-taking, of entrepreneurship, of willing to put forth an idea even if it may fail. And I think this is almost the exact opposite of how things are done in Washington. I think in Washington people are very risk averse, very unwilling to fail, very concerned about losing position. You know, and I think in the Valley it's much more about what you know. I think in Washington it's much more about who you know. I think titles matter a lot more in Washington. Here people live in having cubicles. If they're the CEO, they're your office space determines how influential you are. So to me, it's a whole cultural change. And the great thing about the tools of Facebook and Google and other things is that you don't have to be Sheryl Sandberg or Eric Schmidt and take a trip to Washington. I mean, you can use, you now have a voice. You can like something on Facebook, you can post it, you can like it on Twitter, you can participate in Russia's company. So I view Silicon Valley as helping potentially open up the possibilities for greater citizen participation, and we certainly could use that disruption in Washington.
Great. To ask some questions, why don't we have the mic in the middle, kind of in the middle of the aisle here, and people can come up to the mic and ask some questions. The next one from the audience that I have here is, and this was alluded to a little bit, which is Google, Facebook, and carriers know a lot more about consumers and users than some parts of the government today. What should the government do to secure this information so that these other companies don't in some way become more powerful than the government itself, or is that a worry?
I mean, I can answer first and then give Will and Rachna a chance. You know, I'm very, very sympathetic to this argument that there should be a sort of Internet Bill of Rights, a sense of making sure that people's privacy is protected, like Lila said about Facebook or others, that they have protections with companies. That said, I do always want to put into context just the sheer power of the federal government compared to Google or Facebook or any single one company. I mean, you have trillions of dollars of spending. You have huge forces. The Gates Foundation, which I deeply admire, all their education spending up till date is about 2 times the state budget of Virginia in public education spending, to give you a sense. So the reality is the federal government matters. The federal government has huge resources and power, and the concerns are deeper. But I do think that there should be an Internet Bill of Rights and some protection from abuse from private companies as well.
I don't see the government as responsible for protecting our privacy against the government. I don't expect that from the government, but I do expect people to speak up and urge the government to change things that individuals aren't happy with. Last week, the Data Act passed in Congress, and not a lot of bills pass in Congress, so when something passes, it's a big deal. And the Data Act would actually add transparency to government spending to see where government money is being spent, and drill down not just for at the macro level, but just also drilling down to where money is going to specific agencies and what that money is used for. But more importantly, making it easier for this information to be found, I'm assuming through a searchable database online. That doesn't sound surprising here in Silicon Valley to have a searchable database, but to have the government do something like that will be very exciting because it adds a level of transparency we haven't seen. And how did that bill pass? Well, with a lot of support from the issue experts, from companies, from trade associations, and from individual voices. So if there's something that the government is doing that you don't like or your community doesn't like, it's time to speak up and tell the government that. And just one letter isn't necessarily going to make a difference, but it's about informing other people and sharing your viewpoints with other people and informing others. And you can't expect the media to do that now. And the responsibility is to you and me and all of us collectively in ensuring what it is that our values are in our communities.
Well said, that's my good point. I want to go back to the specific sub-question that you had asked about, should the government be somehow moderating what a Google or a big, basically you're saying you want to create a monster, and how are you going to try to tame the monster? And I tend to take the view, I have a very strong view that the idea of private enterprise still holds very true in my heart. So, I mean, you could always argue that something like a 2008 financial crisis could happen in the data information crisis in 2017 maybe. Okay, that sort of an argument can be put forward, but I tend to take the belief that there is something more Darwinian about this. If some company starts to collect so much information and is going to get so powerful, the industry is how should we say, Darwinian enough that it will have adverse effects on that company. I would not want the government to get in the middle of this arbitrating how much information can a person collect, because I think that company is going to get into trouble sooner or later. It can be Amazon, it can be Google, it can be anybody, or it can be Apple, but at some point of time it's going to have a backlash effect. So I don't think the government should even show their face in this business. Frankly, it's private enterprise, and it's things that you have to do to make your service better as a company. So I'll take that view. And I'll also say something which is similar to that, like you could potentially do something like the equivalent of a Sarbanes-Oxley on governance. You can have the same thing for data, for companies saying you have a certain sort of mandates within which you have to live. But beyond that, should be free territory. That's my view.
So Ron, during your inaugural address, you talked about there's more to transparency than just the government and this kind of information. And one of the questions that came here is about the finance world. It says, how does the SEC improve transparency of information shared by companies for IPOs and other public market transactions? It appears that information is severely distorted by intermediate interests all along the way before it actually gets shared with the public.
Well, to be honest, I'm not an expert on that, so I'll let someone else take the question. But I mean, on how to increase transparencies with IPOs, I will say more generally on the financial crash, I think that the lack of separation between banks and investment banks and allowing banks to speculate with people's money and not having a clear Volcker rule and separation was one of the causes of the crash. And if there are rules with the SEC to further make sure that there's transparency for IPOs or investment, I mean, I'm happy to look into it and talk about it, but I don't have a knowledge or an expertise on the top of my head that I want to offer an opinion that may not be right.
The question again is, how does SEC improve transparency of information shared by companies for IPOs and other public market transactions? It appears like the information severely gets distorted by intermediate interests before it gets to everybody else. Okay. The next question is kind of the same question is being asked to both Ro and to Lil, trying to get the two perspectives on this. Data collection is half the problem. The other half of the problem is data retention. So how long do each of you think data should be retained for? It could be a very specific question, but at a philosophical level, should data once collected always be there and be held by a technology company, by government, and where should that go?
Yeah, I'm going to stick to my point of view on this, which is once you collect data about something as part of the service, and you have the consent of the person who is giving the data to you, and that's important. That data is yours as long as you want to use it for any beneficial value, which is either going to be beneficial to a company or the individual. That's the point of any data service, if you look at it that way. Now, so long as you have the consent of the person, you can have the data forever. Now, but at the same time, if you change the company then gets bought over by some Goliath who doesn't believe in honoring the commitments from before, then you have a problem. But that's a corporate problem which has to be fixed through a different legal method. That's got nothing to do with the collection or the keeping of the data. Once collected, it's yours.
I agree with Lou. I think the key is the consent, and the government's intervention should be to make sure that the companies are actually getting consent of individuals before they're taking data. But if there is honest, transparent consent, and the company collects the data, as long as they're not misusing what that data was given for, I think that's fine.
Okay. The next couple of questions are on the same topic, and it's about leadership. Can you talk about the authenticity of leadership and the trust that we build in a brand, whether it is an entity or the government or the media, and how critical that aspect is? Because a lot of people in the audience are leaders and are dealing with similar questions, not from a different perspective. Instead of answering it to a citizen or consumer, if you were starting a company or representing the government, what should you focus on to make sure you're doing things right? So how could you be a responsible leader so that you do things in a way that you build trust in what you're doing?
I'd be curious for others to weigh in. My view is that transparency in communication is very important. Acknowledging if you make a mistake, if something is wrong in politics, usually the cover up or trying to hide things gets people in more trouble than just being straightforward. And certainly I tried to set in my team a sense that let's always just get the information out there. Let's be acknowledge if there is a mistake, communicate the information truthfully, which in the long run I think creates the trust, and creates trust even if people may say, oh, you made a mistake here, or we disagree with you here. It builds over the long run a trust, and I think that's what's missing right now from people in Washington.
Trust is also, it's building a relationship, and you can't just assume one connection with your company's user is going to build trust. It has to be a two-way street where you're providing the information in exchange for them using your product or service. And I think with Congress, with the way people have been communicating with Congress in the past, how many of you have signed a petition to Congress about any issue? Okay, how many of you have heard back after you signed the petition? And you might not have. You don't even know where that petition went that you signed, or what website you signed it on, if it ever reached them, reached the appropriate member of Congress or the president. And there's been so many layers of political communication happening that it's kind of helped to erode the relationship between that constituent and the member of Congress. Events like this, when you're actually talking to people that are in leadership positions, like Roe, and also just communicating with people in a way that's transparent, where you know that message is getting there, is really important. And then hearing back from your lawmakers is important. And I think that somewhere along the line, that's eroded and further contributed to the lack of trust. And when I look to other companies, just as an individual, not just from my own company's point of view, that's what I want to know. If something goes wrong, is there somebody I can go talk to, and are they going to say, "Oh, sorry, we made this mistake. Here's how we're going to fix it." And people are forgiving. They know there's computer glitches always, and I feel good using companies that are honest with what they're doing with my information. But then also, if they make a mistake, they're honest about that and how they're going to fix it.
Yeah, triggered a couple of thoughts, but let me give you just one or two quick anecdotal examples as to what, from my personal background, about what tends to be viewed as transparent from a leadership point of view, and what really makes sense. In 2007, a lot of you relate to this. In 2007, 2008, and 2009, there was a big spectrum allocation bid in India, and a lot of politicians were involved in it. And I happened to be involved in it marginally from the point of view of the company Intel that I was working for at that time. And there was a way by which we could have bid on the spectrum by keeping the letter of the law, but it would have kept we would be inside all the FCPA policies, but it didn't sound quite right. And I called one of our senior VPs, my boss at Intel, and said, should we do this? And he said, it doesn't smell right, does it? I said, no, it doesn't smell right at all. And I said, I wanted to call you before. I said, I'm absolutely not going to do this. And he said, yeah, it's okay, let's lose the bid. And I think a company like Intel at this point of time was standing up to something which was far more than just, the letter of the law. We could have gotten several millions of dollars of credit. We could have gotten that. But my whole team was waiting to say, should we do this or not? And I said, no, I'm not going to do this. And it turns out that we did the right thing. And by the way, the minister who was involved in this later got fired and got into jail. Several other multinational companies got into this mix. And I'm very delighted to say that we all got out very clean and happy about it. And it's really important from a personal point of view that I can sit here and talk about it. And my team still feels really happy about the whole thing, though we lost that whole bit. That's the best way to explain this to you. Can't do this.
Any questions from the audience? There's one in the back.
Yeah, hi. Help me understand this, that government doesn't bother me that much. I mean, they're not smart enough. What starts bothering me is, and I'm not a lawyer, but here's the question. If corporations are people, what is the implication of that for companies like Axiom, who amass more and more data at the individual level? What's the solution? One solution would be to paraphrase Shakespeare, first we must kill all the data scientists. But that doesn't make much sense. What's the solution? Because the corporations are the ones who have large amounts of data. Obama won an election based on data science. Where are we going with all this?
The fact, okay, let me put it in a context which I understand. The fact, there's always, you're not going to be in a position in any time soon that the data collection is going to get lesser. Okay, fact of the matter is that data is going to be available simply because people use devices, and the notion of a network started in the mid-80s, and then from that point on, your life was never private anymore. So that's not going to change. The question is, what do you do as a company if you're going to collect data on individuals? And I go back to the previous point I made, which is, you keep all the data. There's nothing you can do about it. Now the question is, how much can you mine about it? What can you find out about it? You can find out a lot of information about individuals, groups, but it's not that simple to say, you, Chandra, are going to be seen 2 hours from now at the cafeteria outside Mountain View in that particular. It's not going to be that kind of a particular piece of data that they're going to keep on you. Nor is it going to be something that you can control. The issue is, you did not give them any data which you didn't feel was bad. Right? You're giving them control to say, okay, you're carrying a phone, so